Did you know that the World Economic Forum recently projected that insured losses from climate-related disasters could hit up to $145 billion by the end of 2025?
Yeah, and I mean, that number is just staggering when you really sit down and think about it.
Right, and guess who ultimately ends up paying for that?
Yeah.
You are. I mean, think about the last thing you ordered online.
hmm
When you clicked buy, you probably didn't, think twice about the journey that package was about to take. You just expected it to show up on your doorstep.
Exactly, we all do.
But right now, the global logistics machine is fighting this massive, totally invisible war out on the ocean. We're talking about a supply chain that's basically battling a global weather system that is actively trying to rip it apart. So, welcome to today's deep dive.
It's an incredibly high-stakes situation, honestly. The whole logistics network that operates, behind the scenes of our daily lives is under an unprecedented amount of pressure. And the cost of maintaining it is climbing every single day.
Right. And to figure out how this massive industry is responding, we've pulled together some really fascinating material for today. We're looking at corporate climate transition reports from the global shipping giant Maersk.
Yeah, those are really detailed.
Super detailed. And we also have some recent supply chain disruption analyses, and we even got our hands on highly technical ship engineering specs from a company called Alfa Laval. So our mission today is to unpack how this industry is racing to completely reinvent itself and really protect your deliveries from extreme weather.
Yeah, and we really have to set the timeline here because it frames everything we're about to discuss.
Right, that's crucial.
Because it's April 2026.
Okay.
The logistics industry isn't just, drafting white papers or talking about climate change as this hypothetical threat for the distant future.
No, it's happening right now.
Exactly. They're in the trenches right now. They are still untangling the massive supply chain disruptions we saw in 2025. And the entire sector is practically holding its breath for some vital global regulations expected to be finalized later this year.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking that immediate threat, because when we normally talk about a warming planet, the imagery is usually, melting ice caps or stranded polar bears.
Like the usual pictures.
Yeah, and that feels abstract to a lot of people. But the data shows severe weather is a highly physical, brute force attack on how we move physical goods.
It is a daily operational nightmare. I mean, just look at the grim numbers from the World Meteorological Organization.
What are they saying exactly?
Well, they've reported an 86% chance that at least 1 year between 2025 and 2029 will exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels.
Wow, 86%.
Yeah, it's almost a certainty. And the transition reports we're looking at, they break down exactly how this warming dismantles supply chains on 5 distinct fronts.
So it's basically a multi-front war. What's the first front?
First, you have torrential rains and rising sea levels. So we're seeing warehouses flooding and critical port infrastructure literally drowning.
Just totally underwater.
Exactly. Second, there are extreme heat waves.
Yeah.
And we aren't just talking about, uncomfortable temperatures for the workers, though that's an issue too.
Right.
When it gets hot enough, rail tracks literally warp and buckle under the sun. And road surfaces degrade and melt. Land transport just grinds to a halt.
Right, seriously. So a train carrying your new laptop literally can't drive over the tracks because the steel has expanded and twisted?
Yeah, exactly. The physics just don't allow it.
That is wild.
It is. Third, severe storms and hurricanes are forcing major ports to close for days at a time. And that completely shatters these tightly choreographed maritime schedules.
Because they run on such tight margins, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
Fourth is intense droughts. We saw this recently with the crisis on Europe's Rhine River. When river levels drop too low, waterborne transport just stops entirely. And fifth, you have sudden regional climate shocks, like wildfires or freak blizzards. Those can instantly shut down a local supplier and create bottlenecks that ripple outward for months.
I always try to visualize the global supply chain as the human circulatory system.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, so let's take that Rhine River drought as an example. Why does a dry river in Europe matter to someone, sitting in the United States?
Right, the connection isn't obvious.
Exactly. Well, if the water level drops, barges have to run at maybe a quarter of their normal cargo capacity so they don't scrape the riverbed. That means you suddenly need 4 times as many barges to move the exact same amount of stuff.
And the problem is, those extra barges simply don't exist. You can't just spawn them out of nowhere.
Right, so the cargo just sits there on the dock. It's not just a local issue, it's like a blocked artery. And a blocked artery in one place causes a heart attack in a totally different part of the global body.
Exactly.
A factory in Asia suddenly has to halt production of a car because a tiny crucial component is sitting on a dock next to a dried-up river in Europe.
That's a great way to picture it. And bringing it right back to the listener, this circulatory failure is the hidden mechanism behind sudden price spikes at the grocery store, or those really frustrating out-of-stock notices online.
So it hits your wallet directly?
Oh, big time. The delays cost money, the extra barges cost money, the insurance for warped train tracks costs money, that $145 billion damage projection we mentioned earlier, all of it eventually trickles down to consumer prices.
I know a lot of logistics companies are relying on the Internet of Things and predictive AI to map out these disruptions. Like, they try to see the storms coming and reroute ships around them.
Right, the digital tracking is huge.
But playing a global game of dodgeball with the climate can't be a permanent survival strategy. I mean, eventually you run out of places to hide, right?
Which is precisely why Maersk's current strategy is so aggressive. They've realized that to survive, they have to address the actual root cause. They can't just dodge forever.
So what's their goal?
They've set a target to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions across their entire value chain by 2040. And what's notable here is this isn't just slick corporate marketing.
Always a concern with these big pledges.
Right, but this target was rigorously validated by the Science-Based Targets Initiative, the SBTI. So that aligns Maersk with a strict 1.5-degree pathway under their new maritime guidance.
Okay, so how do you actually turn around a massive carbon-heavy machine like a global shipping company?
It's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, the transition plans map this out through a few major levers, starting with efficiency.
Efficiency is really the immediate first line of defense. Maersk splits this into network efficiency and asset efficiency.
Let's start with network efficiency. What does that look like?
Well, on the network side, they recently launched the Gemini cooperation with Hapag-Lloyd in 2025. They essentially redesigned their entire east-west shipping network to drastically reduce the number of port calls a single vessel makes.
So fewer stops.
Exactly. Instead of a ship stopping at 10 different ports and just burning fuel idling outside each one while waiting, they run a leaner hub-and-spoke model. Fewer stops literally mean fewer miles traveled and fewer emissions.
And they're leaning heavily on digital tools to make those routes smarter, right?
Oh, heavily. They've deployed an AI platform called Star Connect. This system processes over 2.5 billion data points annually.
Wait, 2.5 billion?
Yeah, for more than 700 vessels. It takes in weather patterns, ocean currents, and engine performance to forecast fuel consumption. Then it adjusts the speeds and routes in real time. It ensures the ship burns the absolute minimum amount of fuel necessary to arrive on schedule.
Okay, so that covers the network. What about the physical ships themselves? Because I was looking at the retrofitting numbers in the sources, and they are wild.
Oh, that's the asset efficiency piece, and it's massive. Maersk completed over 425 retrofits on their own vessels in 2025 alone.
That's huge.
Yeah, they're physically changing the hydrodynamics of the ships. They're installing highly efficient propellers and fitting new bulbous bows to the fronts of the vessels.
Okay, let's pause on that. What exactly is a bulbous bow, and why does a cargo ship need one?
So if you've ever seen a cargo ship out of the water, it has this giant torpedo-like protrusion right at the front, below the waterline. That is the bulbous bow.
Oh, yeah, I've seen pictures of that.
Right, so as the ship moves, it pushes water ahead of it, creating a bow wave. Pushing that wave takes a massive amount of energy. The bulbous bow is designed to create its own secondary wave that perfectly cancels out the first wave.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it significantly reduces the drag on the hull. When they retrofit a ship with a newly designed bow that's specifically optimized for its typical operating speed, they save a tremendous amount of fuel.
That is fascinating.
And they're also adding waste heat recovery systems. These capture excess engine heat to produce electricity for the ship's internal systems.
Okay, so they're making the holes slip through the water easier, and the AI is mapping perfect routes. But I have to challenge this whole efficiency strategy. Let's say you engineer the most aerodynamic ship in history. It glides through the water, the AI routes it perfectly, and you've optimized every single port call.
Okay.
If the massive engine inside that ship is still burning dirty, fossil-based sludge, isn't efficiency just, putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound? There has to be a mathematical ceiling to how much carbon you can actually cut just by being efficient.
You're absolutely right. That's the exact problem the industry recognized.
Yeah.
And Maersk's own transition plan admits efficiency has a hard limit. You can really only squeeze so much carbon out of a system that fundamentally runs on fossil fuels.
Right.
Efficiency is vital, but but it really only buys them time. To actually cure the disease, they have to fundamentally change the diet of these massive vessels.
Which brings us to the real breakthrough we've seen.
Yeah.
Green fuels. And we aren't talking about science fiction anymore. Maersk has a product called ECO Delivery-nya.
Yeah, that's been a huge step.
In just 1 year, they moved over 660,000 TEUs on green fuels.
Let's make sure we define TEs for a second.
Oh yeah, good call. TEU stands for 20-foot equivalent unit. It's basically the standard unit of measurement in shipping. It represents one standard 20-foot shipping container.
Right.
So moving 660,000 of those containers using fuels like biodiesel, which, by the way, is sourced from waste streams like used cooking oil, is a massive scale-up. Major brands like Volvo and Nestle are using this service, and they're achieving over 80% greenhouse gas emission savings on a well-to-wake basis.
But well-to-wake is a really important metric to understand. It doesn't just measure the carbon coming out of the ship's smokestack, the wake.
So it's the whole life cycle.
Exactly. It measures the entire life cycle of the fuel, starting from the moment it's extracted or produced at the well, all the way through transportation, refinement, and final combustion. Getting an 80% reduction across that entire life cycle is a huge logistical victory.
Biodiesel is definitely a great stepping stone, but the engineering specs from Alfa Laval point to an even more complex shift, which is green methanol.
Yeah, this is where it gets really technical.
Because Maersk brought the world's first methanol-fueled container vessel into Copenhagen back in 2023. Fast forward to today, in 2026, and they have 19 of these dual-fuel vessels operating on the ocean. But running a ship on methanol isn't just, swapping out the gas tank, is it?
Not at all. It presents a brilliant engineering puzzle. See, methanol has a very low flash point.
Wait, low flash point meaning this stuff vaporizes really easily and could ignite or blow up if it's not handled perfectly.
Exactly. Traditional heavy fuel oil is thick and relatively stable. Methanol, on the other hand, requires highly specialized handling, double-walled piping, and extreme safety measures.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Alfa Laval had to design a specific low flash point fuel supply system, an LFSS, just to safely move the methanol from the ship's storage tanks into the engine. But the truly fascinating hurdle they had to overcome was a very specific operational quirk.
What kind of quirk?
Well, methanol combustion runs a lot cooler than traditional heavy fuel oil, meaning it produces very limited waste heat.
And why does a cargo ship care about waste heat? I mean, the ocean is cold, right?
It cares because these massive ships are basically floating cities. They rely on the intense waste heat from their engines to power their onboard freshwater generators.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they literally boil seawater to create fresh, potable water for the crew to drink and for equipment maintenance. If your new green fuel runs cooler and doesn't produce enough waste heat, your crew suddenly runs out of drinking water in the middle of the Pacific.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's like trying to bake a cake in an oven that suddenly runs 50% cooler than it used to. You can't just adjust the recipe. You literally have to invent a completely new type of oven.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
Yeah.
And Alfa Laval did invent that new oven. They developed a specialized freshwater generator called the AQUA Blue E2.
How does that work?
There's incredibly clever thermodynamic engineering. This system uses a single plate pack to optimize the heat exchange process. The result is that it provides the exact same amount of fresh water for the crew, but it requires 50% less heat to do it.
That's wild. They solved a massive water crisis just by redesigning the heat exchange.
And by solving that specific problem, they also improved the ship's overall carbon intensity indicator, or CII rating.
What's the CI?
The CII is a global metric that grades how efficiently a ship transports goods. Because the AQUA Blue E2 demands less energy from the ship's systems, the vessel burns slightly less fuel overall, which naturally boosts its green rating.
So let's look at the bigger picture here. We now have these beautifully engineered, green fuel-burning, water-generating ships crossing the ocean. That is a massive win.
It really is.
But the ocean is only the middle segment of the journey. Once that perfectly clean ship docks, the cargo still has to travel across land to reach you, the listener.
And that landside transition is arguably even more fraught with complications. Maersk is making an aggressive push to electrify the edges of their network, so the ports, the warehouses, and the land transport.
Right.
For instance, at their APM terminals, they're rolling out battery electric handling equipment in Egypt, Jordan, and Spain. They even launched the Rijeka Gateway in Croatia, which actually operates as a fully renewable terminal.
How does a port become fully renewable? It can't just be, plugging into the local wall socket.
No, it requires a top-to-bottom redesign. At the Rijeka Gateway, they aren't using traditional diesel cranes or straddle carriers. Almost all the massive equipment used to physically lift and move the containers is battery electric.
Wow.
And the electricity powering those batteries is sourced entirely from regional renewable grids, meaning the actual daily operation of the port produces zero direct emissions.
And what about the warehouses where the goods sit before they get to me?
They're tackling those too. They've built zero direct emission facilities like the Talav Dry Port in Denmark. That facility is BREEAM Excellent certified.
I should clarify for anyone who hasn't worked in commercial real estate. BREEAM is one of the highest global standards for green building. Getting an excellent certification means the facility goes way beyond just, swapping out light bulbs. We're talking massive solar panel arrays on the roof, hyper-advanced insulation, and operating without any direct fossil fuel emissions on site.
Exactly. And on the road, they're deploying electric trucks in Latin America, partnering with Skoda in the Czech Republic for heavy-duty EV trucks with a 500-kilometer range. And they're heavily involved in building out a long-haul EV truck corridor between Los Angeles and El Paso.
That all sounds incredibly comprehensive. But here's my question. Let's say a company builds a perfectly green, fully electric terminal. They have battery electric cranes and a fleet of EV trucks.
Okay.
But that terminal still has to plug into a local city grid. If that city's grid is still burning coal to generate its electricity, aren't we just playing a shell game? Aren't we just moving the carbon emissions from the diesel trucks at the port to the smokestack of the power plant 10 miles down the road?
You've hit on the massive strategic vulnerability in this entire master plan.
Really?
Yes. In the logistics business, Maersk is what you call asset light on land. Out on the ocean, they own the ships, they control the ecosystem. But on land, they rely heavily on third-party trucking companies, external commercial building owners, and, most importantly, local electrical grids managed by local governments.
So they literally can't control how the electricity is made.
No, they can't. And that exposes the biggest hurdle in the global climate transition. No single company, no matter how massive or well-funded, can decarbonize in a vacuum. The success of this entire landside phase depends on reaching what economists call cost parity.
Meaning electric transport needs to become as cheap as using dirty diesel.
Right. Until those EV trucks and green terminals reach cost parity, local third-party partners just don't have a business case to invest in the transition. They are entirely at the mercy of global economics, local infrastructure readiness, and international rules.
Which naturally brings us to the elephant in the room, right?
Right.
The price tag of going green.
It's totally unavoidable.
Yeah.
Right now, green fuels like methanol and the massive charging infrastructure required for heavy electric trucking are significantly more expensive than the fossil fuel status quo.
So who fixes that?
Well, the transition reports point to a critical geopolitical bottleneck holding everything up, which is the International Maritime Organization, or the IMO.
The IMO is essentially the United Nations agency responsible for regulating global shipping, right? How do they fit into fixing the price gap?
So the entire shipping industry is waiting on the IMO to finalize a net zero framework. A key component of this framework is a global pricing mechanism, often referred to as a green balance proposal.
How does that work in practice?
Conceptually, this mechanism would apply a financial penalty to vessels burning dirty fuels and use that money to subsidize the cost of green fuels. It's fundamentally designed to forcefully close the price gap and level the playing field globally.
It makes complete sense. I mean, I think of it like a highly competitive sport. Imagine one team voluntarily deciding to wear heavy training weights during a championship game. Those training weights represent the extra costs of buying green fuel and investing in Alfa Laval freshwater generators. You can't expect the entire rest of the league to voluntarily put on the weights too, unless the referee, the IMO, changes the rule book and mandates it for everyone. Otherwise, the green team just loses to the cheaper, dirtier team.
That is the reality of the market. But the geopolitics are slowing things down. At an extraordinary session back in October 2025, the IMO actually postponed the vote on this net zero framework. They pushed it till later this year in 2026.
That's frustrating.
It is. The analyses we reviewed note this delay represents a dangerous loss of momentum. Companies like Maersk are still lobbying incredibly hard for it, because without that global rulebook, they just carry the financial burden alone.
And bringing this all back to you, the listener, what does the IMO's delay or the eventual cost of this green framework really mean for your wallet?
Ultimately, the cost of closing this gap will trickle down to the prices of the goods you buy. Whether it's subsidizing green methanol or building electric trucking corridors, shipping costs will rise.
There's no getting around it.
No. But you have to weigh that against the alternative we discussed at the very beginning. Paying slightly more for a sustainably shipped product is the necessary price of ensuring those goods can actually survive the extreme weather of the future and make it to your door at all.
We've covered a staggering amount of ground today. We started by looking at how severe weather, from warped rail tracks to dried up rivers, is threatening to break the global circulatory system of trade.
Hmm.
We examine how the shipping industry is fighting back, first with extreme efficiency, using AI to map routes and redesigning hulls with bulbous bows to reduce drag. We dug into the complex thermodynamics of burning green methanol in the open ocean and how Alfa Laval engineered a way to keep crew members supplied with fresh water.
Hmm.
And finally, we explored the massive logistical and political shell game of electrifying ports and relying on global bodies like the IMO to balance the checkbook.
It truly is a monumental industry-wide transition. They are essentially attempting to rebuild the ship while actively sailing it through increasingly rough waters.
And that leaves me with one final provocative thought for you to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive looking at how companies are spending billions to perfectly optimize and decarbonize moving goods across thousands of miles of ocean. But as extreme weather continues to threaten these incredibly long, vulnerable global networks, will the future actually belong to local manufacturing? I mean, if supply chains eventually shrink and become hyper-localized just to avoid climate disruptions entirely, will these massive, brilliantly engineered green ships eventually become obsolete just as they reach perfection?
It's a fascinating paradox. Solving the carbon problem might not actually solve the distance problem.
Next time a package arrives on your doorstep, take a moment to look at it before you open it. Think about the invisible, globally sprawling, weather-battling machine that got it there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.